Welcome to our weekly National News Conference. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. Today, we look at President Biden's border enforcement and immigration policies 6 months after he took office. On the campaign, he promised to be the anti-Trump and reverse the harsh policies adopted by the previous administration. How well has he delivered? Our experts today include Muzaffar Chishti, Director of the Migration Policy Institute's office at NYU's School of Law, Nicole Ramos, Border Rights Project Director at El Otro Lado in Tijuana, Mexico, and Ava Banach, founding partner of Banach Calliope and an immigration attorney based in Washington, D.C. Ava, did I pronounce Calliope correctly?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Great. Thank you to all three of you for joining us today. Please speak slowly. You notice I am speaking slowly for our interpreters who are simultaneously interpreting your remarks in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. And hooray for our interpreters. We invite reporters to enter questions in the chat box, which we will address after each speaker as time allows. And by the way, to our speakers, please monitor these questions. If there are questions you can answer in the chat box, many of us in the media will appreciate it. We will send a video of today's briefing and expanded bios of the speakers following the conference. Now, I'm excited to turn the conference over to today's moderator and briefing co-coordinator, Pilar Marrero. Pilar, take it away.
Hi everyone. Hi Sandy. Hi all our panelists. Our second panelist, by the way, is having trouble with her link too, so I'm dealing with that at the same time. But this is the life. This is a very important meeting, a very important briefing, because this is a topic that is in a lot of the minds of us in the ethnic media. And as someone who covered immigration for almost 30 years, very interesting to see where we are headed. So I will invite Muzaffar Chishti, Senior Fellow, Director, Migration Policy Institute Office at the New York University School of Law. And he will give us a broad overview of what's been going on in this last 6 months under the Biden administration in terms of policy decisions regarding immigration and the border. Mr. Chishti, please go ahead and take the stage.
Thank you so much, Pilar, and thank you so much, Sandy, and thank you to all of you in the ethnic media who we speak to constantly. I'm sure I've spoken to many of you, and you're not only our important sources, but and our important ways of communicating to very important audiences. Very pleased to be here. I work for the Migration Policy Institute, which is a think tank. We focus only on migration issues. And we are a nonpartisan think tank. We cover the Trump administration as vigorously as we cover the Biden administration. And let me just start with that comparison. I think if we could all agree on one thing is that and I'm never tired of saying this, that Trump was the only president in our history who came to office using immigration as his trump card. Pardon the pun here. And he kept his promise. He remained one of the most aggressive administrations on immigration. And we kept a scorecard. When we issued a scorecard on Trump at 4, that was the highest hits on any MPI publication we have received, because it was seen that Trump had been so aggressive on immigration, and we are showing the public. Trump, in the 4 years of office, issued about 450 executive actions on immigration. And that was seen as an activist presidency on immigration. Biden has been in office only for 6 months. And I'm here to tell you that in the first 6 months of the Biden administration, 155 immigration actions have been taken. I don't want to do the math here. That would suggest to me that he is going 3 times the rate as Trump, which was considered an immigration presidency on steroids. So we just follow the scorecard, whether it's Trump or Biden, and scorecard so far suggests that he has been really very, very strong on immigration actions. Of the 155 actions, half of them have been unwinding Trump, and other half have been improving on pre-Trump policies. So you could say, using Biden's language, half of them have been building back better, that improving things that prior Democratic administrations were not able to do, and I'm glad to do that in question and answer. But let's see what he has done. On the very first day of his administration, when you compare that with other issues of national security and global warming and Iran and nuclear stuff, he issued about 7 executive actions on immigration. On day one, he rescinded all of travel bans that President Trump had put in motion, which brought us sort of bad press in all of the world. He paused border wall construction, which had become a hallmark of Trump presidency. He reversed Trump's policy on not counting unauthorized in the census. He revoked Trump's past directives on interior enforcement. He said that he would expand and preserve DACA. He reinstated the deferred enforcement for librarians. And then most importantly, on that very day, he sent to Congress a blueprint for what he believed was going to be his imprint on immigration reform, which sort of became his main immigration reform package for legalization of the 11 million people. And then he's followed them with series of executive action. We don't have time to go through all of them. I just want to highlight about 5 or 6 of them. First, just enforcement, which is dear to my heart. I've spent a lot of time in the last 10 to 12 years focusing on enforcement because that's all that's been going on immigration. The Trump administration, to me, was defined by one thing more than any other thing. It was a statement issued by ICE Director Tom Homan, once saying that every unauthorized person should be looking over their shoulder every day. That was what became the Trump mantra, that all 11 million unauthorized people are fair game. They're fair game for ICE officers at the grassroots level, at the super. We should make no distinction among the unauthorized. So at the end of the administration, all 11 million people were a priority for the Trump administration for removal. Biden reversed them on day one. It can be said with one stroke of pen, he reversed the priorities and he said, immigration priorities of this administration are only going to be high criminals or recent arrivals. MPI calculations suggest that 87% of the unauthorized population today have nothing to worry about enforcement. That means ordinary status violators who are not criminals can leave their home in the morning and be reasonably sure they can come home at night and see their kids, which we could not guarantee at the end of the Trump administration. I don't know about the rest of you. To me, that's existential change in the lives of 11 million people. And he has been able to keep that promise, that numbers of people who arrested has gone down hugely, number of people who are detained has gone down hugely. And more important, on this prolonged family detention, which advocates have been arguing for ending since 2001, has finally ended. At the end of Trump administration, a family typically stayed in detention for 60 days. Today, a typical family stays in detention for 1 week. Now, that's a big change. Now, of course, people are pointing out that still people are getting arrested. To me, when you compare 87 to 13, you can either focus on 87 or you can focus on 13. To me, if you focus on 87, the glass is half full on the score of this administration. Now, even at the border, which has been the subject of a lot of controversy, and we'll get to that, where Title 42 is in state, he did introduce significant changes, like Title 42 was not applied to unaccompanied children. It was not applied soon to most families. He ended the Migration Protocol Plan, which is MPP, which had been obviously a very thorny issue, both with Mexico and among advocates. And he ended the practice of the third country transit rule which Trump had put in place, that if you come from a third country, you're not eligible even to apply for asylum. And then something which has gotten very little publicity is that at the end of Trump administration, he wanted to end all temporary protection status. And they were stopped only by court injunctions. 330,000 people were in danger of losing their temporary protected status at the end of Trump. Biden has reversed all that. And since then, he has extended temporary protection to Venezuelans and now redesignated Haiti for it last week. Our calculation is that if you do all these people together, 750,000 people today are eligible for temporary protected status under the Biden regime. Similarly, if you look at the decisions that had been taken by Attorney General Sessions and then by the Attorney General's bar, which had disqualified large number of people from asylum, gang violence victims, domestic violence victims. And that was a big change in asylum policy. All those major 4 decisions have been reversed by Attorney General Garland only in the last 1 month. We had complained that it had taken long to do that, but they have finally happened. That people who are victims of gang violence and domestic violence are now considered eligible to apply for asylum. That's a sea change in the world of asylum. And then one thing we had criticized the administration hadn't done the first 100 days was to raise the refugee cap. And refugee cap had been, in the Trump administration, we reached the historic low in our commitment to admitting refugees. Only 15,000 refugees were admitted in the last fiscal year. Biden increased that to 62,000 for the remainder of this year. And he has promised that for next fiscal year, that number will be raised to 125,000, which is close to what President Obama had promised at the end of his administration. All this is, I'm just not being Democratic or Republican, I'm just giving you the scorecard. Where the problem lies today and where all the oxygen is taken and all of you are covering is at the border. All the attention is on the border because there is a crisis at the border. In July of this year, the numbers have come, we believe about 200,000 people were apprehended at the border. That is historic high since 2005. In each summer month, it is May, June, and July, the numbers normally go down because of the heat. Numbers in each of these months have gone up. We believe the numbers stay like that, more than 1.5 million people would have been apprehended in the fiscal year 21. That is almost historic. And this is true with respect to Mexican individual males. This is true with respect to people coming from Central America. This is true with respect to people coming from countries other than Central America. So the profile of people, both with respect to their characteristic as individuals or family members, or the countries of origin, is all going up, which has created a political problem for the president. Because Republicans, as long as Trump especially is lurking in the political background, all of their attention is on the border. So if the president wants to push anything legislatively, whether in a real bill or reconciliation, they always point out to the border. I mean, you heard it from Florida Governor DeSantis yesterday. Don't give me lectures on vaccine as long as you're not fixing the border. It's almost everything is held a prison to the border issue. So for when people say he's not lifting Title 42, of course that's a problem, but you're not looking at the series of political and real policy challenges the president has. And I think that's going to unfortunately dominate a good part of how the presidency on immigration is going to look at. So let me stop there and glad to take questions.
And there are some. Thank you so much. Let me read the questions for you, Muzaffar. Let me call in the reporters to ask the questions. So we have a question from Mohsin Zahir. Mohsin, can you unmute him and allow?
Yes, Mr. Muzaffar Chishti. My question is that you told us in detail what President Biden have done so far with regards to immigration, but 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States are looking at President Biden, and they think this is the time and this is the chance that something could have been done for them. So do you think, what are the prospects for them in the near future or in this congressional term?
That's a good question, Mahim. And as I said, on the very first day of his administration, he said he sent a blueprint of immigration reform package, which to me, frankly, was the most aggressive immigration blueprint I had seen of every presidency in the last 50 years, which included pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people. It included clearing of backlogs in the family immigration, employment-based immigration, all good things. Except Biden can't do it by himself. You can grant legalization only by an act of Congress. And Congress is divided. I mean, he has the slimmest majority both in the Senate and in the House. And so therefore, as long as he gets at least 60 senators to agree on immigration reform bill, it doesn't go anywhere. And that's why, unfortunately, why I'm stressing the border issue. Because Republicans whom he needs to support for that are not there to support him on immigration reform as long as the border is seen or perceived as out of control. It's not even the reality, it's the optics that country has somehow, and Republicans particularly, have gotten into their head that immigration at the border is out of control. And that doesn't work well either in the world of public relations or in the world of politics, and definitely does not work well as long as Trump is lurking in the background. Listen, Trump made a visit to Texas recently, where he focused on the border with the Texas governor, who's now essentially the opposition in chief out of the. So all I'm saying is that as long as we don't get 10 Republicans to support immigration reform, is going to be hard to achieve. But he, I think, is committed to pushing it.
Sunita, go ahead with your question.
Good morning, Mr. Chisti. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I've interviewed you several times for India West newspaper. I wanted to ask, what about the backlogs of people in detention? Has there been some attempt to fast track the asylum cases of people in detention? And following up, are there more bond hearings now than during the Trump administration, when essentially no one was getting a bond hearing?
Exactly. Trump had essentially eliminated bond hearings.
Right.
So the Attorney General's director of bond hearings should again go in place. Look, Sunita, I completely agree with people's frustration. We're just coming out of 4 years of the most anti-immigrant administration we have had in the history. Undoing it itself is such a burdensome thing that I think you have to give them some time and you have to give them some credit for what they're doing. Have they done everything? No. But bond hearings will start again. You all probably all know, and if you haven't, you should interview him all. One of the most prominent civil rights and lawyers in the country, Lucas Gutentag, was just appointed as a special advisor to the Attorney General on immigration, who has the jurisdiction, therefore, of all the immigration courts. So we expect a lot happening there. I think the fact that the Attorney General's Garland reversed many of the important decisions will tell you what the trend is, but it takes time. On the detention, I think family detention clearly has gone down. There's a huge change in family detention. I think on the individuals in detention, there is much more work to be done, and I grant you that. But even the individual detentions have gone down, I think, by about half since the end of the Trump administration.
Dear Muzaffar, please stay around. We're going to go to our next speaker. If you can stay a little bit, maybe we'll have more questions for you.
Of course,
okay, thank you. We're going to go to the border now because that's where the biggest frustration is. And we have someone who's a huge advocate and a huge voice at the border. And I'm very glad that she agreed to be with us. Nicole Ramos, Border Rights Project Director at Al Otro Lado. She's based in Tijuana. Nicole.
Thank you.
Hi. How you doing?
I'm great.
tell us what's going on there at the border, what your frustrations are.
Well, as we all know, the Biden administration put an end to the MPP program. However, the wind down of that has proven to be a lot more complicated, unnecessarily so, and slow than it needs to be. There were approximately, I don't have the figures exact, 70,000 people placed in the MPP program. And phase one was processing only people with active cases. So people who did not receive an order of termination from the immigration judge because there was some defect in their charging documents or in the proceedings, and that does not include people who were unable to make it to court, who missed it because they were in the hospital, they were kidnapped, and they received an order of removal in absentia. And that also does not include people who received a final order on the merits. So
You call MPP, can you explain that? Because maybe the terminology is not something that
Sure.
everyone knows.
MPP stands for the Migrant Protection Protocols. It's also known colloquially as the Remain in Mexico program, whereby tens of thousands of asylum seekers from Cuba and other countries in Latin America, not just the Northern Triangle countries, were sent back to Mexico after presenting themselves to US immigration officials and given notices to appear in immigration court, and had to remain in Mexico, but for intermittent entries into the United States to attend immigration court proceedings in their asylum cases. As a result of the MPP program, thousands of people have been kept in Mexico, in some cases for upwards of 2 years. We've now moved into phase two processing. So this is approximately 50,000 people who have closed cases, either because it was terminated or they have an order of removal in absentia or on the merits. And the processing of those people is going very slow because it requires the government, the immigration, the ICE attorneys to join motions to reopen cases on an individual basis. They could have chosen to do a reopening of all of those cases and process all of those individuals impacted by the program, but instead they are choosing to do it on a case-by-case basis, which leaves people stuck in Mexico for even longer periods of time. A lot of people are really concerned about what's happening with unaccompanied minors. There has been litigation around this in the context of Title 42 brought by the ACLU. The party line is that unaccompanied minors are not being turned away by Border Patrol or CBP officers in the port of entry, but our experience on the ground is that they are being turned away because we are in contact with minors. We accompany them to the port of entry, and they are able to get in when an advocate presents with them and argues on their behalf, but minors just going up to the port unaccompanied by themselves are frequently turned away. That's not to say all of them are turned away, but they are turned away with alarming frequency. Everyone is obviously very concerned about Title 42, which is the expulsion policy that sends asylum seekers back to Mexico. And Title 42 remains in effect. It's a very complicated topic. We understand.
But it has to do with the pandemic, right? With the health situation.
Well, it was enacted ostensibly because of the pandemic, but interestingly enough, US citizens, legal permanent residents, they can enter Mexico and come back into the US as many times as they want or need to, and they're not subject to any health screening, and they're not necessarily coming to Mexico for medical care. They're coming for vacations, they're coming to visit family, they're coming for shopping and entertainment, and they're not subject to any health screening. So if the goal was to really protect the public health, one would expect that there would be a health screening. Now, in contrast, asylum seekers that have been allowed to enter the US under Title 42, under a process known as humanitarian parole, they are subject to COVID testing prior to entering the country. Recently, we've received word from the government that they are going to stop accepting applications for humanitarian parole in connection with the ACLU case known as WISHA. And that's very concerning because that's going to create a further backlog of people who are literally dying to be able to make their asylum claim. Across administrations, under the Obama administration, under the Trump administration, and under the Biden administration, there is this expression on the part of the government that these policies at the border are to help ensure orderly processing, to ensure that migrants are not subject to organized crime or human trafficking or nefarious characters. But what Title 42, it really does is it creates an open market for organized crime and for human traffickers. And since Title 42 has been in place, the number of people that we encounter that have been victims of organized crime, either through kidnapping and extortion of their family members in the United States or in home country, or been victims of forced labor or sex trafficking, has increased exponentially. The problem with kidnappings of migrants at the border under Title 42 has risen dramatically. And what we see is tens of thousands of dollars, US dollars, being sent to organized crime in Mexico in order to rescue their family members. Our staff has been passed along videos of migrants that their family members have sent to us trying to seek help, where they have firearms pointed at their heads and they are demanding money in order for their family members to be set free and alive. Really troubling also under Title 42 is the expulsion of migrants that have either fallen onto from the wall onto the US side and have very severe injuries and need medical attention, as well as women in active labor who have been sent back to Mexico in active labor instead of being transported by Border Patrol after being apprehended to a US hospital where they could give birth to their child safely. And that we actually have documented video footage in particular of one migrant family that they sent the mom and father back while mom was in active labor in the back of the Border Patrol truck. And luckily we were able to assist them with Mexican immigration in order to get them to a hospital in Mexico. And perhaps one of the things that I find most troubling about Title 42 is the expulsion of US citizen infants with their migrant mothers when they are just only days old, before they have been able to get the opportunity to secure an official US birth certificate. This happens when the migrant mother has either crossed the border without inspection, and then during the course of that migration goes into labor, understandably because of the stress of the situation, and is transported to a US hospital by Border Patrol officers. It's also occurred where a migrant mother has presented herself at the US port of entry, although in much fewer circumstances, in obvious distress, and CBP has transported the mother to the hospital. Instead of what they've done in the past, which would be to parole that mother and child, give the mother a notice to appear in immigration court, where she would then have the opportunity to make her case for relief and to make her application for asylum. What they're doing is, as soon as mom is medically cleared to leave the hospital, regardless of whether the doctors have recommended any sort of follow-up care, and in many cases they did, due to complications of either the mother or the child's health, they expel the mother and child back to Mexico without any sort of plan for transportation, shelter, money to make a phone call. Some of these mothers do not even speak Spanish. We've seen this occur in the cases of mothers that are citizens of Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, as well as Haiti. And it's put these mothers and these US citizen infants in situations where in some cases they've had to sleep on the streets of some of the most dangerous cities in the world, where we instruct embassy and consular officials to not stay out at night. And these mothers are literally fending for the lives of their infants that are only a few days old.
Nicole, the interpreters are asking you go a little bit slower, but let me ask you a question. You're giving us a very detailed picture of what's actually happening at the border. There's a number of things that you have touched on. do you feel that, so why do you feel things are so chaotic at the border? Do you feel that the Biden directives focused at the border have failed to help with the situation, or is there anything good that has come with this last 6 months?
I think a positive for the last 6 months is obviously the ending of MPP and the beginning of processing for those with active cases who have been impacted. But I believe the policies of the Biden administration have largely failed at the border. Understanding that there is a large cleanup from the havoc that has been wreaked by the Trump administration. But Title 42 is not a policy to protect the public health. And I think that we should stop pretending that it does. Because if it did protect public health, then we would also be concerned with US citizens and residents traveling in and out of Mexico, and not solely migrants that are subject to COVID screening in order for them to be able to make a claim for asylum in the US. The amount of income that we are generating for organized crime by Title 42 is astronomical. And that is income that they will use to grow their criminal operations and ensnare more migrants as victims.
Great. Okay. There's a question by Henrietta Burrows. Henrietta, do you want to ask your question?
Thanks so much, Pilar. What happens to unaccompanied minors when they're turned away at the border?
They are left to their own devices. Some of them are living in Tijuana in the tent encampment at the port of entry, which is in a plaza that is controlled by organized crime. People experience violence there every day. There's kidnappings. It's a site where traffickers can hunt for victims. If they're lucky, they are able to meet an aid worker who can help them get into a shelter. And then we're able to hopefully connect with them and accompany them. But sometimes they're not lucky. Sometimes, they're ensnared in circumstances that are unimaginable. And I can only suspect that there's many children that will never be found.
Nicole, one thing that happened when the Biden administration started is that we started seeing more migrants coming at the border, maybe with the idea that, well, it's the Trump administration is over, so now we'll come in. Is this part of the problem?
I mean, it's been a border stop for almost 2 years now. And so there's a huge backlog. And so people, I don't know that there's this mass migration that is happening. There's certainly a strong effort by the Mexican government to stamp out any sort of caravan or mass migration from leaving southern Mexico. But there are thousands of people that have been trapped here for a really long time. And so they're trying to cross because it is a desperate situation. There is a almost complete lack of medical access to medical care here. Because of the pandemic, many people have lost the opportunity to work. We have people that we're working with all across the border. Some people are living along the side of the river, not even in a tent, and struggling to just have enough to feed themselves and their children. And so they're taking the chance that the Biden administration won't expel them. But a lot of these people have been here for a really long time.
And do you feel, Nicole, that the Border Patrol, because I remember during the Obama administration, I mean, they resisted a lot of his directives. Is the Border Patrol resisting Biden, you think?
I think the Border Patrol continues to resist any directive that it would increase justice or access for migrants. It's a culture, an agency culture that views immigrants as a potential danger to the United States. And so when you're viewing other individuals as a potential danger, you're going to make your best efforts to ensure that they don't get into the United States. Certainly, I don't think it's part of their directive to refuse life-saving treatment to someone in labor or someone who is not able to walk because they've broken their back falling off the wall. And yet that is what they're doing. They're pushing these people back across into Mexico without any sort of interest for their well-being or safety.
Thank you, Nicole. We're going to move to our third speaker, but please stay with us because I'm sure there will be more questions towards the end. Thank you so much. And we're going to move to our third speaker, and that is Ava Benat, founding partner of Benat Kalopi. And she's going to talk to us about what's happening at the courts and what's happening at the administrative level in her experience with her clients. Ava, welcome.
Thank you, Pilar, and thank you, Mr. Chisti and Ms. Ramos, for setting me up here. I'm going to talk about what's happening in the interior, what I see as an immigration lawyer every day, and what's changed and what hasn't. It's really a tale of two cities. There's what's happening on the border, and there's what's happening in the rest of the country. And as Nicole described it, I mean, the border remains a horror show, and that is very much a part of this legacy, and I don't think really should ever be not discussed when writing about the Biden administration and immigration. That being said, there are some positive developments. Now, I'm going to hedge my praise because a positive development in this case is something that gets us back to the status quo ante pre-Trump. It was already a disastrously overburdened, unfair system before Trump got his hands on it. And simply vacating and eliminating a lot of what Trump has done is obviously the first thing you do. I guess the first thing you do is stop digging, right? And then you start filling it in again, and then eventually you get to build. And so we're still in that filling it in period of time. And there's been some very positive developments that have had tangible effects for people every day in immigration courts, before the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, and with ICE in the interior. I also want to just say that not having people tell you that you're evil and horrible all the time is a psychic benefit to all of us. You know, Fridays during the Trump administration were always the worst day of the week because we thought, what are they going to drop on us today? So there is a tremendous sense of relief among practitioners, among a lot of people, that there's not a constant, oh, is this the week that they're going to go out and do the expanded expedited removal? Is this the weekend that they're going to round up people? These rumors of raids that really put communities on edge over the last several years. Not having that's been a tremendous benefit. That's the sort of intangible. The tangible, and Mr. Chisti mentioned it, is the priorities. The priorities memo that came out initially said, look, we don't want to waste our time on people who are here working and not really causing any problems. We want to focus on national security threats, law enforcement threats. And so if you are somebody who is here and undocumented and going about your life, you know, unless you come to their attention, usually through some sort of, not in a positive way, they'll go after you, but otherwise the sense that the working man would walk out his door and not come home, that's been ameliorated. So that's a big benefit, but they've taken it a step further and they've turned that into a couple of policy actions that they're doing now. And that is, you know, we're seeing less people put into removal proceedings. I saw a statistic that the AP wrote a big article about immigration detention soaring despite the campaign promises. And while it's true that the numbers of people in detention have gone down since their heights in the Trump era, the largest portion of that occurred during the pandemic. And since the pandemic sort of bottomed out in February, detention numbers bottomed out around February 2021 and have doubled since then. So we went from 60,000 people in detention to 15,000 people in detention to 30,000 people in detention. Okay, it's better than Trump, but it's also not. It's not where a lot of us want it to go. But ICE does the vast majority of detention now doesn't come from ICE, the people in the interior. It comes from CBP. It comes from the Border Patrol. And so much so that some of the restrictionist advocates have been saying that there is no interior enforcement. You don't have anything to worry about unless you find yourself arrested on criminal charges. So that's good. The other things, so as I was saying, they've translated this into tangible policies. And what does that mean? Well, ICE and DHS have issued policies saying to their attorneys, to their detention officers, don't detain these people. Don't put these people into removal proceedings. If there is a way for you to help a person by agreeing to join a claim for relief, if there's a way for you to help somebody by reopening a case so that they get the chance to apply for something that they seem qualified for, do that. Now, we've seen that before. All of us old types know the Morton memo and various prosecutorial discretion measures that were imposed by the Obama administration, but never really got the level of, I don't want to call it buy-in or forced compliance from ICE. One of those two is happening, and I don't know which it is. I don't know if ICE is going along kicking and screaming, which is my sense, or they're just happy to get cases off of their plate. Because when someone's in removal proceedings or has a removal order, there's two ways to get that case done and resolved and over. One way is to deport the person. The other way is to let them apply for something that they can get. Both, one creates a deportee, the other creates a permanent resident. Either way, you are bringing down the undocumented population. And if that's a goal, they should be equally useful ways for ICE to address these millions of people in deportation proceedings, which, by the way, is horribly, horribly backlogged. If you went to a hearing this morning and asked to have your case heard, you would get a hearing in 2024 where I live in Washington, D.C. 2025 maybe. And so, yes.
Can we talk about the green card backlog a little bit? I mean, there is a huge backlog in giving green cards at the moment. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. Visa immigrant green cards are allocated by what we call preferences, which are basically categories. And categories are, there's family-based categories and there's employment-based. There's some other ones, but they're not really relevant here. We're largely talking about the green card backlog. There's two distinct ones. There's the backlog in family-based that is really so insurmountable as to be as if there isn't a green card available. For example, if you are seeking if you are a Mexican citizen and you have petitioned I'm sorry, let me say that again. If you're a United States citizen and you've petitioned for your unmarried son or daughter who's an adult, 21 years or older, that is a 22-year backlog. So you file that today, and potentially that person can get a green card in 22 years. But that's not actually true because the backlog builds. And same thing with if you are a US citizen and you sponsored your brother who was born in the Philippines, you're looking at right now 19 years. So that's one set of backlogs. The other set of backlogs relates to employment-based cases. And in that, we really see a tremendous problem with India. The visa numbers are divided per country. And so the backlog on for Indian workers means they would have had to apply for green cards through employment, depending on their level of education, either in June of 2011 or July of 2013. So 8 years in a backlog for an individual with a bachelor's degree that a US company wishes to hire and put on and provide residence for and give stability for. And that, and it's really only affecting Indians. It does affect Chinese nationals, but not to such a great degree. The Chinese nationals have 2018, 2019 numbers. So these backlogs are, it's a complicated scenario. A lot of green cards aren't used every year and go to waste. They don't get transferred between categories. A lawsuit was filed a couple of days ago by a couple, by lawyers Chuck Cook of Atlanta, Greg Siskin of Tennessee, Memphis, and Jeff Joseph of Colorado to try to protect some of the visas that are likely to be lost when the fiscal year ends and potentially bring some relief to those backlogs. Those backlogs put people at the mercy of their employers and their continued employment. They reduce mobility and they create a tremendous amount of anxiety for people. Did I get to what you wanted there?
Yes, yes. Thank you,
Yes.
Ava. And let's use the last few minutes. Yeah, you did great.
Because I haven't even
to-
talked about LEA and AB yet, and that's really far more my comfort zone than
Look, immigration
number.
law is, to me, more complicated than tax law, and that is something to say. It is very hard to grasp an idea of what's really going on in this whole system, and that's why reporters break it down and they focus on one thing. I didn't want this briefing to be that. I wanted this briefing to be broad so people saw there's more than the border going on, but there's also the border going on. So let's move to close. Let's move to closing with questions for the three of you because we are running out of time. And this is for the three of you. What do you think is happening to the public support for immigration reform? Is the crisis at the border eroding that? Mr. Chishti?
Yeah, I think the good news is that most Americans think immigration is a good thing. And it'll probably come as a surprise to many of you. Here, the country has radically changed in the last 20 years. At the end of the 20th century, majority of Americans did not think immigration was a good thing. I think the numbers were like less than 40%. Today, about 60% of Americans think immigration is a plus for the country. And the only thing is that the division between Republicans and Democrats on this has never been wider. That the country has become overall more pro-immigrant, but the Republicans have become less and less pro-immigrant. and Democrats have become more and more pro-immigrant. When I entered the field in the early 80s, you could see an equal division between Democrats and Republicans where they were pro-immigrant. That polarization now has grown to about 60% between Republicans and Democrats. And to me, that explains everything. If you're a Republican running for an office, if you're seen as pro-immigrant, the only thing it does is invites a contender for you in the primary, and you're dead. And people speak about McCain and Kennedy as these two big bipartisan. Even Senator McCain at the end in 2006 could not support his own immigration bill because the base of the Republican Party wasn't there. So the fact that the polarization of the parties is so large now, I think explains the politics, which is what the border stuff is exploiting. The good news here, and I'll conclude there, is that younger Republicans are more pro-immigrant than older Republicans. With each new generation, the baby boomers are the worst, I'm included in that generation. The generation after that, each generation has become more pro-immigrant, including Republicans. So that to me is good news for the future.
I wanted to bring Nicole in, but also ask her, Nicole, is the situation of women at the border arousing any support from Americans, from women's rights groups, or from some movement like Me Too, for example?
It's challenging for me to say what is the temperature, what is the feeling of Americans and their appetite for the border, because I'm based in Tijuana. I very rarely cross the border into the US. But in terms of outreach by women's groups or the Me Too movement, from us personally at El Otro Lado, we have not seen any of that outreach. You know, I can only assume that people's plates are full with what's happening on the interior, but what's happening with the state of women on the border is something for serious concern. The way we structure our services, we have an incoming survey that migrants fill out online in order to identify themselves as in need of services. And of the 17,000 people that have signed up, 2 in 5 have been subject to a serious form of violence while they have been waiting to be processed or further opportunity. We've seen a dramatic uptick in sexual abuse of women and girls, aside from those that are being trafficked, but just individual incidents of them being abused in their shelters, in the homes where they are staying, by their employers, and on the street.
Thank you, Nicole. Ava, I wanted to add to your question, a question by Henrietta that's on the chat about judges. You know, judges were, a lot of judges, their Judges Association was complaining all through the Trump administration about being forced to do things they didn't want to, you know, they didn't feel were lawful. How are judges reacting or feeling right now that you know of? And what about their rulings? Are they more sympathetic or harsher?
I'm going to talk just for a second about a sort of boring bureaucratic part of it, which is that judges have regained a lot more control over their own dockets. A lot of stuff that was micromanaged by the Department of Justice has now been returned. And one of the biggest good things that's been done is that Attorney General Merrick Garland reversed a decision by Attorney General Bill Barr, excuse me, to allow judges to administratively close cases. Administrative closure just is like taking a case off the docket, so that some other benefit can be sought while you're waiting for that. So it gives the judges a lot more control, and I think they appreciate that. That being said, Trump radically changed the complexion of the immigration judges corps and appointed a lot of people that share Jeff Sessions's and Bill Barr's and Stephen Miller's ideologies about immigration. And And so that's changed a lot of how these rulings come. I don't know. We're gonna have to wait and see how these people rule in a non-Trump setting, and where ICE is supposed to be more amenable to working with private counsel. Where we'll see what they do. Some judges, immigration judges, were the face of the resistance for 4 years, and others were brought in simply to bring more Millerite balance to the bench.
Thank you, Ava. We have only 2 minutes left, and I don't want to take anyone's time. So Sandy, if you want to go ahead and close.
Well, I've just been gripped by what everybody has had to say, the historic overview, the detailed stories, the interior, the view from the courts and in the interior. You've really done us a great service putting these 3 broad areas of immigration into sharper focus for us. I think we're at such a challenging point. So many of us felt once we moved past the Trump era that it was just going to be steady improvement for the policies that he had put in place for immigration. Everything is more complicated than I think we realized at the beginning of the Biden administration. And Mr. Chisty, you've given us cause for hope. Ms. Ramos, you've given us tremendous important call to action to cover more stories on the border, especially involving women. And Ms. Bernach, you've really helped with so many of us who are trying to track individual cases, green card holders. This is where it gets really complicated. And I think all of us are going to want to say, can we reach out to you separately and follow up, because you're all great sources. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.